Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Peacock. If you aren't already, please go to combatlearning.com/newsletter to get my Intro to Motor Learning for Martial Arts paper so you can get up to speed on the powerful concepts we're discussing in the show. Plus, you'll never miss an episode. Go to combatlearning.com/newsletter. In part 2 of 2, Scott Sievewright returns to discuss the opportunity cost of traditional training methods. For those who haven't heard that term used for training, opportunity cost basically refers to the benefits to learning that we're potentially missing by spending time on traditional methods when we could have been using more live methods. We also talk about the problems with copying elite coaches and how our biases surrounding them has screwed up talent development pipelines inside of combat sports and led to resistance to new and scientific ideas in training methodology. One note before I go on. I mentioned in the previous episode that I joined Scott Sievewright, but actually he's really interviewing me. So I joined him in this podcast, but I'm publishing it here also on the Combat Learning Podcast. So if you're excited to jump in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher now and enjoy the show.
Did you want to talk about the opportunity cost? Because I know we talked about that in DM a while back. That was a big thing you've been thinking about.
It's a big thing I've been thinking about, and perhaps this may bring the two philosophies or teaching styles closer together in effectiveness. But I think the fact that you're actually the passive side of that arrangement, of that decoupled drill, whether it be the pad holder or the oogie that's just letting you armbar them, they're getting nothing out of it. So they're already starting, as far as I'm concerned, they're already starting at 50%.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. But I didn't even include that when I thought about it before. I was just thinking about the drill itself is suboptimal, which is not using the time. But now you've added an additional layer of deficit because there's an entire half of every partner team that's getting nothing out of it.
Or let's be as generous as
or very little.
They're getting less out of it.
They're getting less out of it. So they're already getting less out of a suboptimal exercise, whatever that comes out to.
Okay, I'll go with nothing.
Yeah, let's go with nothing. I think if you added, it depends on what the drill is. If you added a degree of movement where a person has to actually manipulate space, you could say maybe they're getting a little bit out of it. They can play with angles a little bit, but it's decoupled enough that if they're not thinking about it consciously, they might just do stuff that just doesn't matter. But I don't know. Things are so complex; it's difficult to account for everything. That's true, and I agree with you. One of the first arguments I used to get into when I posed the problem of learning a round kick in the context of scoring points on a moving opponent versus learning a round kick in the context of doing forms is that you only have so much practice. Most people only practice for about an hour. In the UK, a lot of the guys that do Taekwondo clubs, they'll train for like an hour and a half. So they think they have just an infinite amount of time to do everything. Which still, it's only a half hour more. And, considering how long they do warm-ups sometimes, like 20 minutes, you don't really have an hour and a half to actually train. So what's going on, the argument I used to have was if you want people to act, what do you think is going to happen? If you have somebody who practices a judo throw against a resisting opponent 40 times in the course of a given time frame versus somebody who only does that 10 times and then does 30 reps without a resisting opponent, what do you think is going to happen? And the problem with those sorts of thought experiments is that your debate partner will never stay inside the thought experiment. So they'll say, well, we have enough time to do everything. I can balance it. You for whatever reason, Josh, you can't balance it in your class, but I can. We do everything in my class. We do forms and kata and sparring and everything, and it fits in just fine. So when I try to communicate to that, the opportunity cost, they don't understand the opportunity cost because they don't agree with the suboptimal nature of what they're doing.
Right.
But if you as a coach who has knowledge and you as a practitioner, you know that these are suboptimal, you have an ethical dilemma, because even though students might be expecting these things, and I know from experience that these are way easier to do. It is so much easier to teach a class when you can just fall back and do drills and whatever, right? They're more controllable. They're safer for the students. Sort of safer. They're scripted, they're cooperative, and the intensity is so low that you don't have to be anxious about almost anything going wrong. So it's so much easier on so many levels. I've actually come to somewhat disagree with you there, because I find it's, of course, I don't go in with no plan. I go in with a generalized plan now, and then we'll see where it goes, and we'll identify little areas that I think I can again shift around with that challenge point, and you know, like I don't know, it sounds pretentious as fuck, but like as a little bit of a conductor. But I felt when I was actually having to come in with a robust class plan, this is going to be, and I did it for years, Josh. This is going to be the drill. We're going to work on this today, blah, 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 blah. That there was actually a great deal more work there. And maybe it's just because I have a better understanding of what I'm doing. But I think once you get familiar, I think so.
So I think on the contrary, for me, it's almost easier now because the plan's much looser, less rigid.
Yeah. So I think that's good that you bring that up. So from somebody if you've never done constraints-led approach, it's way easier to fall back into traditional stuff because there's there's another reason why, and this is kind of inside baseball for like Taekwondo and karate schools. The ones that are really commercially successful, they have really well-defined systems for everything. Their curriculum is extremely intricate. It's on a tight schedule. It's scoped and sequenced like a public school would do it, or a charter school or whatever. Everything is highly structured. The instructional systems are structured, the class structure. Anybody can come in and learn it in a couple of weeks. And if they have previous martial arts experience, they can run the class and they can run everything. And there's so many variables that are controlled that they don't have to worry about that stuff. Now, when you become skilled enough in the ecological or the constraints-led approach, and you've built your school culture on that, there's a shift where it's actually tougher to go back to traditional, I imagine. I haven't really run an entirely. I was just beginning to experiment with that stuff when I closed my Taekwondo club. But I imagine that there's a lot of things that actually become easier because your attention is on. First of all, you don't have to give as much feedback as a traditional martial arts instructor would. And you don't have to make sure that everyone's doing everything perfectly right in their line drills and everything, because they're interacting with a partner and it's not supposed to be perfect. They're supposed to be exploring, right? So there are things that are a little bit easier on you as an instructor in terms of cognitive load and where your attention's at. So I can agree with you there. I think that's probably... I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who's kind of entrenched in that system and doesn't want to take a risk, which is one of the reasons why I think one of the psychological reasons why I think Dr. Gray says you need to choose one or the other, because if you let yourself to do something like like I was saying before, whenever I talk to these Taekwondo people or these karate people, everyone is people are remarkably syncretistic. They don't want to change how they practice. They don't want to change how they approach practice. They just want to add whatever it is you have to offer. They just want to throw it in there.
He's almost removing it as this kind of crutch or burning the bridge behind him in a certain extent.
He doesn't want you just to add it, right? He wants you to change it. And so not everything traditional will disappear, but it'll become the intensity and the consistency of it will diminish as these other methods become more emphasized. And he doesn't, because I think he understands that he understands that. I'm sure he's talked to enough people that people are like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I hear this all the time. I'll say, oh yeah, I think that this approach is not, research is kind of saying that this is not really helping you do what you want it to do. This is really how you should try to approach it. The research says X, Y, Z. This is why. And then they'll, if they actually ask a clarification question, I'll kind of talk about how you can think of sparring, and then you can kind of bring it down to like a constraints thing, like a positional sparring type of deal. And they'll be like, oh yeah, we do that too. We do that too. But that's not the issue though. Whether or not you do it too is not the issue. The problem is that you do everything else. You could do more of this. You could do more variety of this and get more benefit. But people, they don't want to, it doesn't translate.
That's right. And I think a great example of this is the difference between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So the wrestlers, first of all, I think I kind of like the intensity of wrestling and the kind of wrestling. I'm not familiar. I wasn't a wrestler, so I've never really been in too many wrestling practices. Actually at all. But I know a lot of wrestlers, and it's the same thing that comes up. Well, we drill. I said yes, but you also typically train 2 to 3 hours every day for 5 days a week, and compete almost every weekend. Yeah. And then you're trying to compare that with a jiu-jitsu model that, like you said, people are coming in 2-3 times a week. They're competing at a grappling tournament once every 2 months, perhaps. I said it's apples and oranges. It's apples and oranges. So yes, given enough volume, you're going to be doing a lot of the better stuff. It's not about that. It's how we minute for minute we can optimize.
Yeah. And when you have 5 hours a day, you have no choice. Nobody has the cardio to do, positional drills and skirmishes and sparring and conditioning that entire time. You have to do stuff that's more like reps. But when you're doing that, the occasional isolated thing is not terrible because you have so much representative training, you have so much contextual training that the rest of that is just like little optimizations. And you have enough contextual experience that the little optimizations, even if they're isolated, could be helpful to you. But when you're recreational and you only train 3 times a week, you're not even getting enough of that experience for the optimizational, doing isolation exercise for optimization. You're not getting enough experience for that to be that helpful for you. You're just slowing your progression down.
Added to that, when you're actually trying to learn mixed martial arts, there's really three kind of different sports you're trying to piece together.
Right.
I get it in boxing, right? I get it because I see the boxing, the road work and the pad work. Of course, in boxing, the fundamental goal is to batter each other in the head. You just can't. It would be grossly unethical to have representative boxing practice every day. But with MMA, I mean, that's why I can't be fucking around in a grappling class. I got to get you right away. And this is the post I made the other day. It was either usual-ish. 2 things I got back. It was a straw man. Oh, you can't just go and right away and go balls to the ball.
Oh, they say it every time. It's a script.
The other one, well, they need the fundamental patterns, or it's only 5-6 minutes. But the most common comment was, I usually just turn up late and miss that. So, people were clinging to their ideas like they were children, what they used to do, or it was unanimous. It's really fucking boring, but this is what we do. This is how it's done.
Yeah. I used to train at a place and I love the guys. This is one of the best jiu-jitsu places I'd ever trained at. And I don't live up there. It's like an hour and a half away. So I can't, maybe I can visit them every once in a while, but I just can't train with them anymore. But the one criticism I had was 2 of them. The one is they had this god awful warm up that was just a series of calisthenics and running in circles, and it wasn't even a full 10 minutes. But it didn't matter if it was a full 10 minutes. It was just so boring. It was the same thing every time, and it was just like do some sit-ups, do some crunches with your cross choke, and we didn't even shrimp down the floor. We just shrimped in place. Do some bridges, but we're not going to bridge all the way over. We didn't even do sit-throughs. We didn't even do all the different fundamental movements. We just did some of them and then some random calisthenics. We did some squats and whatever, just, I don't know, who knows why, push-ups. And then we'd have freaking, holy smokes, we'd have 45 minutes or more of just technique after technique after technique. And then some of the techniques would be variations. So they think, cool, they know this one. So now I'm going to teach them something else to do. So this is going to make them more variable. Me thinking of like from like studies in motor learning, I'm like, no, dude, if you don't let them get stable in a movement pattern first, when you try to teach them something that's too similar, it's going to destabilize the other movement pattern. So they're going to get everything jumbled up. And it's going to impede their learning. You have to wait until they learn, you should do like one variation and then do something totally different, like the variable practice design. And, that might be, I don't know, I get them mixed up. I think it's contextual interference, one or the other. That's what you should do, because you're teaching them something and you're giving them a chance to practice it. And then you're immediately destabilizing it before it's taken hold. And they don't even know though. And it's difficult to explain too. How do you explain that?
Right.
Like there's studies that say it, but how do you explain it? It's very difficult.
You have to change your intuition, because now when we talk about it, it's intuitively correct, but I understand from the old way that's intuitively correct.
It's logical, or it seems logical. Yeah.
And I can't take credit for this, but someone else pointed out to me the other day, he's never seen the point of warming up just to sit down and listen to the coach.
Yes. Yeah. I used to train at Lucas Laprise, and he actually had some good warm-ups, but, and those are some of the best guys I've ever rolled with. A great crew down there, but man, we would do a warm-up. We'd warm up for 15 minutes straight and be out of breath and broke a sweat and everything. And then we literally sat down. And the way his teaching method is most people, they teach one or two moves. And sometimes they'll put it in a sequence. His thing from Alliance is that you teach an entire sequence: guard pass, knee on belly, transition to full mount or side mount, and then then transition to submission. And then once you spend a quarter to half a class doing that, then you start variating it. Okay, we're gonna do a little bit different pass, or we're gonna do a little bit different submission, or we're gonna go to the submission and then he's gonna defend it, and then you're gonna do that. So you have this ever-growing catalog of techniques that everyone can barely remember that go in a carefully scripted pattern. And that's supposed to be the secret sauce of the Alliance teaching. And then sometimes they do positional drilling, but usually they didn't. We would go straight into free rolling. It's crazy.
You're saying you've convinced one person. I'm lucky if I've done that, or maybe a couple more. That's not true. A lot of my team now, my coaches are on board, but we're just two assholes that have read a couple of books, We don't have the accolades, and that's a tremendous ship to turn around.
Yeah, my response to the not having the accolades is, if Dr. Rod Gray just descended from on high in front of these coaches and serenaded them with his knowledge, and they knew he was a PhD in skill acquisition, these people would nod and oh yeah, of course. Yeah, we do that too. Yeah, cool. That's awesome. I definitely agree. I agree. And then they'll just go back and do whatever they did before.
Right.
And not care. Because I think fundamentally, people are not actually interested in, I don't know how to phrase that, because people never get enough of quick tips and stuff like that. But they're not fundamentally interested in improving themselves by understanding how things work.
I think that can only come from your own inquiry. Now, again, you can tell people, oh, that's interesting, whatnot. But I think the the longing or the need or the feeling that something has to change or something isn't ticking, something isn't right has to be present. Otherwise, I agree, you're not really going to change people. For me, that was a feeling of inadequacy, and also the feeling that it just didn't really jive. I mean, we can talk a little bit how you originally felt down that rabbit hole, but I went back to school to do a coaching degree, and just through some paper someone I was writing, I came across Trevor Reagan's work on block versus variable, and that just, boom, that was the initial rabbit hole I fell down. And then,
I think that was mine too. I knew about motor learning, but I didn't know anything about those particular approaches.
And then that's what I'm saying. So for me, perhaps prior to that, and maybe not, perhaps prior to that, I mean, I'm no more confident in what I'm doing now than I was. I was plenty confident doing the other stuff.
Yeah.
Or what do you mean? Whether you say lots of confidence or lack of confidence, I have a different understanding and a different approach. But I think for me at the time, I believed what I was doing was probably the right by my students, because it's always been important. It's always been important to me.
Yeah.
But I was meticulous in my presentations.
Oh,
where your thumb was pointing, which way your hair would go. You know, it was ridiculously overprescribed.
The timing of your hip release and the rotation of the punch and the muscle control and the I had even created my own terminology almost at that point. And it was a point of ego for me, because I used to get excellent feedback from parents and students,
right,
and other instructors, that of just how I've never heard anyone describe it with this analogy or explain things the way that you do. And whatever, I have a writing background, and I like to read, and English was a focus in my part of my academic career. So that helped me. And that's what I would do. But I started to first of all, not to notice, but to wonder why, even as I dialed in the precision of my analogies and the precision of my cues, why the kids weren't, why kids were still making so many errors or not getting it, or why it wasn't retaining, the information was not retaining across practices. And then as I got more leeway, because there was a point at which the place I worked for closed down and I struck out on my own. When I struck out on my own, I was provided with the opportunity to design my own program and to play around with what I did in practice. So I started to do more sort of alive stuff in practice. And then I started to notice, why aren't the things that I'm doing in isolation transferring very well to the stuff that's more alive? And one of the eureka moments I had was, there's a problem with a pervasive problem with children when you teach them self-defense techniques. The stereotypical one is the wrist grab, and they got to get out of it, right? And that's not super useful for adults in most cases, but it actually is useful for kids, because kids, they fight each other like that. They try to bully each other and they do things like that. And sometimes, somebody tries to take you, they'll try to drag you that way. And so it's important for the kids to know how to remove a wrist grab and stuff like that, because in the context of bullying, that could be really important. And there's an issue where the kids, they drill so much in class, and they know 16 separate variations of how to get out of the wrist hold in all the different ways. And they get to the point where they can remember them all. So in the context of class, you grab their wrist and then they're able to do it. And it's awesome. But they're outside of class and it's like, surprise. And somebody grabs their wrist, they freeze. They forget what to do. Mm-hmm. They try to get out of it after they freeze and they do the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why? It can't be because they're not trying. Because if they're not trying, they wouldn't be able to perform it in class. Why isn't it? So I started to do games with the kids where I taught them some of the moves. I taught them like 3 different ways to do it, how to move the wrist or whatever. And then I made a game where the rule is you have to have one hand on both wrists. Like if you're the grabber, you have to have hand on both wrists, or you can have two hands on one wrist. But when the defender is able to get both wrists free, then the drill's over, and that guy was successful. So it embedded a little bit of strategy, so the kids could actually like, oh, he's getting out of this one. Oh, now I'm going to do a two hand. So now you have to figure out how to do that. So I taught them kind of different things they could do to help with that. I had them do this, and the kids get better in 1 or 2 5-minute practices just playing with each other and interacting than they would in 6 months to a year of drilling it in class the traditional way. 2 classes. They were already bored and they were too clever for each other. They were getting better at holding, but the kids were getting so good at all the different things that they were doing, just feeling it, right? I gave them a couple of principles and they're just feeling their way around. Some of them were coming up with their own ways to do it, and they were getting out. And they were getting so good that I would even grab them too. And I'm not super strong, but I'm an adult. So I would grab them and I would give them some pretty good pressure. And even though they'd be like, they were getting good at it to where I could just grab them and try and drag them. And I would actually drag them, right? I say, if you let me get you past this point, I stole you. I put you in my car. You failed the self-defense situation, right? And some of them were able to really legitimately get out of my hold. And I was like, so this is good for self-defense training. This is good for just regular training. Just a couple of practices. So there has to be something going on here with letting the kids interact with each other with real energy, with real decision-making and intelligence. And at the time I didn't have those terms, right? Decision-making, representativeness. I didn't have those terms. So, when you don't have those categories, it's difficult to think clearly about the situation. But I knew that there was something there. I'm like, how can I inject more of this into my training? Because it's almost like magic.
It's so fun being creative too. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend John Emmett from Zenyo Jiu-Jitsu. He actually has a once a month consultation with Professor Gray, and he's way further into it than me, and he's been writing about this for a long time. Same trajectory, right? Teaching the old traditional bullshit for years, just wasn't clicking, and then he found his way into here. Now he uses a lot of equipment constraints, which I haven't quite done. It's generally task constraints I use. But I just ordered a bunch of these, the old 1980s. You probably weren't even born now. The sweatbands that the tennis players use.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I bought a bunch of them, and I thought, I might even use this for more of the advanced. So you're going to have one on each wrist and one on each ankle, and just say, right, whoever's got at the end of the round, you got to try and get them off your partner, kind of things, and just these fun little things, and trying to gamify everything, and I think when you get if we'd had this conversation a year ago, I'd been way more, and maybe I've just convinced myself I'm on the right path, but I think more than anything, I've got a little bit more buy-in now from our core group. We're starting to see a lot of success on the mats at grappling tournaments. Our MMA team is 12-2 for the entire time we've been open. So again, it's just a very low amount of data right now. I need more, but it's the preliminary data is in, and it seems to be relatively successful.
Yeah. And I'm sure you'll get better at manipulating constraints and all those different things. Cause the guidance, I've gotten in the habit of trying to just read because I'm always interested in being more specific. It doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be as specific as a lot of like instructional systems are for traditional martial arts and things like that. But like, at least like protocols, right? Like what's the protocol for approaching an elite player who has a really stable functional movement pattern, but there's some stuff about it that's causing him to fail against opponents, and you want to destabilize the movement a little bit and encourage him to diversify it so it has more functional whatever you call it, metastability or whatever, all those buzzwords, right? How do you approach that? Right. I have no idea. There's like you'll get like some general, they'll tell you that's what you got to do. And they'll say, this is why you got to do it. But there's not like, what's the protocol? If I had to teach my assistant coach to do this, how would I approach it? How would I teach it? I don't know.
I think where I've managed to navigate that difficulty or just been fortunate is it's the majority of students I have now learning. I don't teach kids. I'm woefully incompetent at it. But they were generally just walking in the gym for the first time. They didn't really have, I guess they probably did have some preconceived notions of what went on in an MMA gym, but they didn't come from the traditional, because that's often the most difficult to change. Maybe someone's come over from another gym or whatever, and it's very, very difficult to talk about. And I'm not too concerned about that. So we didn't really start, as you said, with these elite level athletes that said, this is what's worked for me. So I haven't found that quite as challenging. And now again, a year into it and the buy-in and the rapid growth that they're seeing, that hasn't been such an issue. But I do absolutely see what you're saying there. And this is the pushback I'll get.
I mean, even a club black belt, right?
Right.
Very good. Maybe not international level elite, but very good. Stuck in a rut, running into the same problems. How do you approach that from a truly ecological perspective instead of just like barking at him over and over again for the same, the way that it's traditionally done, where you do something in isolation and then you just bark at him to remind him to do it in sparring? How do you do it where you actually destabilize it and then, approach it in a quote unquote smart ecological way?
One I don't, because as I say, we don't have a black belt. We haven't been affiliated for, and it's become a badge of honor now. I've been a brown belt for several years now. My partners, I consider him at his weight is definitely the top 2 or 3 grapplers in the whole area and state. And it's become a badge of honor now that we're not affiliated. And in fact, if I was to affiliate with anyone, and I've reached out to him a couple of times, he's not quite into it. It would be Kit Dale.
Because he does. He's on the
very much aligned. Plus, he's hilarious.
He's funny.
That Australian dirty, filthy humor resonates with me well. But again, I'm not. So there's 2 things that go on here. Again, other black belts just don't care. They're doing what they're doing, and maybe the other ones are saying, "What the fuck? What are they doing over there? It's a bunch of nonsense." And so I'm comfortable enough to say, over time, the results will show. And if the results don't show, it's been my misinterpretation or how I've applied the whole system, because I'm completely convinced that the ecological system is the best way to go. If it fails for some reason, the buck stops with me. I haven't implemented it properly.
Right.
But I don't worry too much about other black belts. But we that perhaps will change over time if they say, well, maybe all this goofy shit they're doing over here might be working.
Well, a black belt in, it applies more to jiu-jitsu because a black belt has more experience. A black belt in taekwondo or karate or even judo is at the point where they've mastered the basics and they're functional, but they're nowhere near the level of expertise that a black belt in jiu-jitsu has.
I think that might be changing. And I feel this is where I feel if there's such a thing as a legitimate black belt, I think there's a tsunami of black belts coming. I'd hate to, and this isn't sour grapes at all. I haven't ever really put much value in the whole belt system personally. Yeah. But I think there's a tsunami of participation belts coming.
So because they put in their 10 years, I would say that's the vast majority of these are still getting their roles in the same as anyone else. So they should theoretically still be developing, but the reason why there would be a surge of it is because there is no and the relative skill level would go down because there's no concept of measuring skill level in jiu-jitsu whatsoever. And the only reason why competition sort of works is because everybody who's at roughly a year of experience has roughly the same sort of training experience as everyone else. Mm-hmm. You know, doing your dumb run in circles and skip around like a kangaroo, warm up, and then you do 30 minutes of techniques, and then you do rolling. And that's just what everyone does. And if you want to go to a competition school, you do copious more amounts of scripted, like lock flows and high intensity drills where you're moving, like you're using conditioning, but it's scripted, right? It's not genuine energy. And I think that's probably why the competition system, at least purple belt above, works okay, is because everybody at around that level of that many years in the game has roughly the same training experience. Right. But if half of the jiu-jitsu schools were just to become ecological schools, and that you would immediately have people rolling more. Mm-hmm. So you would already have more experience.
Right.
And then you would have them rolling in a way that's more targeted to build their skills. And it would totally imbalance the whole system if that happened.
Which kind of circles back to, I don't know if I know you're familiar with Kit Dale, but he got his black belt in 4 years. And it wasn't it wasn't because he was at some dojo. He went and competed at that level. And maybe he's maybe not recognized as being the best grappler, but he was at that level.
He's high level,
quick. Yeah, high level, relatively quick.
He's high level.
Not relatively quick, extremely quick.
Yeah, very quickly. High level, very quickly. Loves jiu-jitsu, but admittedly doesn't train as much as everyone else does. So there's a lot of reasons why he's not the best in the world, and maybe he could be. He's also got injuries all the time too, and he doesn't have a team behind him like some of these other grapplers do. But yeah, I think he easily could have been top 10 or something like that. But he was unmistakably high level. And I listened to a bunch of podcasts with him a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. And because I knew he was doing some interesting stuff with constraints-led approach, like just doing positional with new students, just having them move around and do more like wrestling to understand control and positioning and maneuvers and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting. And I wanted to maybe see if I could figure out more stuff he was doing by listening to what he's talking about. And when he got the story of how he got his black belt was basically, he didn't give a shit about what his instructor said. He did whatever he wanted to do off on the side, made him really upset, and still got really good. And he said at the time he was starting to read, he got into it because of rugby.
Well, there's a huge
his coach was
a huge thing down in Australia. Yeah, there's a huge movement down there.
Yep, and he got into it. He didn't know what it was called, but he got his coach in rugby gave him his first exposure to that. He remembered the principles, started to apply it to his jiu-jitsu, and then started to look for more research. That's the critical part. Look for more research, where I believe he referred to the Dynamics of Skill Acquisition book. He couldn't really remember the name, but I knew what he was talking about. He read that. He's read some other motor learning textbooks. And that's what he did to guide his training. And he got really good because he did self-directed learning. He did way more actual sparring. He did more like positional type stuff. And he didn't listen to his coach, which sounds terrible because everyone's like, listen to your coach, listen to your coach, listen to your coach. And
I think in every gym it's like it always reminds me, everyone's got the best mom, everyone's got the best dad, everyone's got the best coach. This cult of personality is strong in jiu-jitsu.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually not. They think they're a lot different than traditional martial arts, and they're not. They're actually really, really similar. even Krav Maga Krav Maga is just karate without kata and uniforms. That's.
And go back to the post I made the other day again at the straw man. It was pointed out to me, well, Gordon Ryan was showing us isolated shrimp drills when we went one his practice, and I went, listen, it's the same with the Mayweather pad work. They didn't get to be the best of the generation by doing that bullshit.
Yeah.
I would argue they may have been even better. Ryan may indeed have spent countless hours shrimping and bear crawling.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he did. I would argue he would have been even better grappler if he cut out all that shit.
Yeah, he would be. He'd have more relevant experience. I love that. That I think I've become curmudgeonly now in the sense that those particular types of arguments I have a cynical take on. When somebody says, well, elite level guy, Gordon Ryan, he does this. He showed me this. Are you saying that he's wrong? That's not a real counterpoint. It's a trap. He doesn't want you to come back with a good answer. He wants an excuse to dismiss you and shut down the argument. And there's two reasons why I think that. The first reason is because they always do that. The second reason is because the same person will also acknowledge that John Danaher, who was a really good roller, but he was not a competitor, he's able to be a really, really high level coach. So your ability to understand learning and all that kind of stuff is not attached to how good of a competitor you are. It's a different domain of knowledge. So they already understand this, which is why raising that counterpoint to you, well, this star athlete was teaching me this. So are you saying he's wrong? And it's disingenuous argumentation. It's dirty argumentation. And it's stuff like that actually, those little things like that. It sounds picky, but it's little things like that damage our ability to at least help each other be better, right? You don't have to do everything ecological approach. If you just did more variable practice, it would be better. But we can't even get to that compromise because people coming from a traditional approach are just really strangely closed off to it.
I agree. Can we talk, maybe we're 2 hours in here, Josh. Can we talk a little bit about the role of just good fortune and luck? Because Gordon Ryan Conor McGregor, they could have walked in at any gym. And I've noticed that, especially with clubs when they explode, there's just like this critical mass, so to speak, that builds with talent, and then then that attracts talent, and talent, attracts talent on top and top. Yeah. And before you know it, it's perhaps less to do with the philosophy of the club, and a little bit more that these athletes are calibrating against better athletes.
Yeah, they're calibrating against better athletes, and they're attracting better athletes outright, many of whom have already been trained in the basics by someone else. So they're decent by the time they get there, and then they're just taking them to the next level. So, and there's actually a legitimate, I think anyone, whether you're information processing, made up your own motor learning theory or ecological dynamics, whatever, everyone can agree that there is a big difference between coaching children along different developmental stages. And there's a big difference between coaching people in stages of their development as an athlete. There's people that are really good at fundamental coaching, right? Freddie Roach used to say that his dad was not the highest level coach, but he was an excellent fundamentals coach. And he was indebted to the fundamentals that he learned from his father before he went on to other coaches that were able to optimize him for higher level performance, right? So there's value in being super good at the skill acquisition phase, and there's value for being really good at the optimization phase. In Taekwondo, we have a couple of there's not many of them because it's not quite as developed, I guess, or not developed, but as big as jiu-jitsu. But we have a couple, and we have Master Juan Moreno, right? Or Coach Juan Moreno. He won, he was a silver medalist in the very early days of Olympic Taekwondo, before the Ihogus and all that kind of stuff. And he's been producing athletes at the highest level. He had 2 or 3 athletes go to the Olympics this year, right? He's been producing athletes at the highest level for well over a decade. But he's way down in Miami, Florida. And his athletes that he's been producing out of there, they're from all over the US.
Mm-hmm.
They move there, right? They find success in a local dojang. They find success there. And then as they tap out with their instructors, their parents usually realize we actually need to find higher level coaching. And so they will find their way down all the way across the United States into South Florida to coach, to be coached by Master Juan Moreno. Now, I'm sure he has some athletes that were grown out of the Miami area, but he has people within his own team, which is international, and from just totally different dojangs and stuff that's not even, affiliated with him. They know where to go. So his clout attracts those people there. So not only are the people there sparring with people who are better, which makes them better, but there's a selection bias going on with the actual talent, because they have an unfair edge over, local level schools that just have local level people that train with them. You have a numbers game going on. So now you have a selection bias. You have really good people with already seeing success in competition from all over the United States coming to one place. The likelihood that you're going to produce more and more and more and more champions gets higher and higher and higher, like you said, for a number of reasons: selection bias, better training partners. Some of Moreno's stuff is better too.
Selection bias fits in beautifully with the ecological approach, right?
Absolutely.
Your environment is selecting for the particular kind of athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. And the clout of the instructor, the strength of the program. AKA, think of AKA, right? They had success with like somebody back in the day, and they had the success. More people that were prospects started to come, and then they got a really big, really great reputation. I think they're originally kickboxing and boxing. Now they're a total MMA program. They have UFC fighters that train out of there. The AKA is well established as an elite place to be coached. But as their reputation grew, it's the reputation. There's a correlation between the reputation growing and the amount of high level athletes they produce, because they attract them from other places, not because you're just a regular Joe Schmo from local, Arizona or wherever their United States gym is. It's not just because you could be a Joe Schmo in Arizona, and if you sign up at AKA and stick around, you're going to be Cain Velasquez, right? No, that's not what it is. You probably be really good, but that's not what's going to happen. They're pulling the best of the best from all over the United States down there. So people who are really into MMA and they're doing well at a local gym, they're going to do their research, and they're going to see these fighters on TV, and they're like, where does Cain Velasquez go? I like him. He goes to AKA. Well, I'm going to pack up and I'm going to go down to AKA, and that's where I'm going to be.
And again, this goes back to that kind of, no, I wouldn't call it, it's not right to call it luck, but just how things play out.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that the other day.
It's a synergy. It's a kind of synergy, I guess you could say.
I was talking about that the other day because, I'm somewhat a little bit privy to what's going on down there, because I had a friend of mine who moved down to California and went to AKA for a while. And I just don't think some of these, be careful what I say here, but some of these Russians and Dagestanis, I'm not sure they're sitting around having the same cost-benefit analysis of hard sparring conversations as I'm having. And that's a whole other level,
That's an interesting conversation. Also, like with, have you seen the Daisy Fresh crew?
Daisy Fresh were up there. What's the name of that top guy? He was
Pedigo fighting.
He was. He just did a seminar at my old gym on Sunday. There, I forget the name. Is it Venus or something? I forget the name of the guy. He's a Daisy Fresh guy anyway. Yeah,
I forgot the name. His last name's Pedigo. I don't remember his first name, but he's got. It's funny because Daisy Fresh is, everyone knows that it's Daisy Fresh, but the business is not Daisy Fresh. It's like Pedigo, like combat submission grappling or something like that. But Yeah. So people are like, why are these guys, why do these guys hit the ground, hit the scene? And why are they taking the scene so fast, like faster than in other situations? Well, they have their own way of talking about it. They talk about it in terms of intensity of training, but you and I would understand that their regular training has as close as possible as you can get to 100% representativeness, because even though they're friends with each other, they go as hard as they can every single session. They're constantly getting injured, and none of them can be, that one of the kids was talking about. He's like, he said, I love these guys, but you cannot take it easy in any single one of these roles or you will get injured. And they're trying to take my head off. I'm trying to take their head off. And when you go to these seminars, what they're teaching is to actually break the jiu-jitsu status quo of being a little bit more relaxed about things and to be more intense and more aggressive. They understand that that's actually creating better athletes. The problem is it's not sustainable. All the guys are getting really injured. And most of them are still relatively young. So they have a lot of potential. Some of them have the potential, I think, to be some of the best grapplers around right now, especially with Gordon Ryan retired. And the problem is their injuries might get them first. They might never have the chance.
Right. And are they coming from, are you privy to the philosophy behind it? Is it just kind of a different intuition, or are they deep into the motor learning themselves?
No, I don't think so. The pedagogue guy he's very smart. He has some understanding, but I can't tell if he studies anything in motor learning. I think there's just an intuitive sense that it's not that most of jiu-jitsu training, the rolling, it has a base level intensity to it, but it's just not super realistic to an actual competition.
Right.
And maybe he did read some stuff. I don't know. I couldn't tell by watching the documentary, but I think he had an intuitive sense of it wasn't that realistic. And then you also have there's multiple reasons, right? So ecological. You also have really young, hot-blooded guys who have untethered themselves from a regular lifestyle. Many of them, they don't have romantic relationships. Some of them do now, but they didn't at the time. They don't live anywhere. Some of them worked a little bit, but some of them didn't even have jobs. And all they did was eat, sleep, and train, right? Mm-hmm. And when you are like, you don't have a lot of options and you want to be competitive, that's going to drive you to be more and more and more intense, because in the absence of an inordinate amount of research on motor learning control, which I don't expect anyone to do necessarily, what's the most intuitive way to approach that? One of the ways is, as most people do, is just to be super highly structured and isolated. The other one is just to be more intense. Go harder. Wrestlers are like this, right? Train harder. Go harder, more intensity. And I think these guys have more of that wrestling inclination, or I'm trying to think of the word I was trying to think of, but they have that bent towards that affinity towards the wrestling mindset of more intensity that they unawares made their practice more representative. And then they also have the thing with their training partners, right? They keep attracting guys from kind of around the Midwest who are pretty good, but they don't really have anywhere to go. And so they go up to Daisy Fresh. And so now you have a little bit of a selection bias, not maybe on the level that a more established
like squad or something. Yeah.
But but they do now. They have a little bit of that in effect now, where they have more people interested in the way they train. They have more people interested in going up there to visit, and now they have more people actually going there to train, coming to live there to train. There's one or two new guys that showed up during the course of or after the first season of the documentary. So the documentary did its magic. So they had one or two new guys show up just because they saw that.
And to be fair, that I have no resentment or bitterness to that at all, because hopefully, if we get all our ducks in a line and get the buy-in and are fortunate and lucky enough, we will hit that critical mass one day and explode.
Yeah,
and you need to earn it. And I've talked about this a ton of times. You can't just read a book and expect to have that kind of draw. It needs to be earned, and ultimately, it's earned through results.
Yeah. And I will say that actually there is luck in your first one or two guys, right?
Right.
When you produce somebody that's really, really successful and you're kind of a no-name getting on the map, those first couple of guys, usually a little bit of the luck of the draw. You got the right person at the right time of life with the right organismic constraints that showed up to your school, and they stuck it out, and you were able to help them become a really high level athlete. People start to notice. You gain a little bit of clout, and you get your ranks get more bolstered by people that are willing to travel, even if just regionally, right? That's millions of people.
Right. I think we might get it the wrong way around, that perhaps it's not the gym that produces the athlete. It may very well be, in fact, the athlete that produces the gym in many respects.
Yeah.
It can go both ways.
Absolutely. It's difficult to tell. I mean, if we don't have an objective way to talk about all the different training methods that they do, to figure out what it is they're doing that's objectively producing these people, it's almost like you can't know. There's no epistemic engine, so to speak.
But don't we have, because I pushed back on that the other day when someone, again, because don't know what the fuck they're talking about, mentioned to me, oh, well, we really don't have any scientific data or anything to say what system is best. And I said, actually, I think you're wrong there. I think sports science routinely demonstrates that training more authentically with the perception action coupling involved with blah, 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 some buzzwords, it routinely demonstrates that it produces better learning outcomes. Yeah. And that's unequivocal. Now, it might not be, again, we were talking on the base of warm-ups the other day. It might not be specific to a jiu-jitsu warm-up, but there's a ton of extrapolations that can be made. Just a ton. Oh, yeah. So it's out there. Yeah. So I don't know when I get pushed back, well, we don't know. And it's like people putting this equivalency that, this system works and that system works. Well, that's our job now. And what you and I talk about is taking it from the real eggheads and trying to bring it into our sport a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. It's people, that's the kind of thing that people say, and they hope that it's true, or they hope you don't have enough reading to know it's not true. It's just a thing that people say. Right. And, I become increasingly, for a number of reasons, I've become increasingly sensitive to those types of conversation tactics, because when they say something like that, they just
do you mean sensitive as in triggered, or?
No, sensitive as in detecting them. And
I'm still on the triggered side.
Well, I don't like it. It does frustrate me because it is that there's an ethical dimension to it, right? I can be patient with them. At the same time, I can also recognize that they're engaging in poor faith in a way, right? And they might not even, it might be subconscious. They might not even totally, there's this concept known as social scripts. It might just be this defense mechanism that pops up, and they're just looking for a reason not to challenge their understanding, because it's painful to disrupt your understanding of things as they are. Because then things aren't going to make sense until you restabilize your understanding. And people say stuff like that, they usually want an excuse not to talk about it anymore. They want to shut the conversation down. And I'm not frustrated that people don't just believe everything I say, or that they're not just ecological dynamics and they don't just become constraints led overnight. I'm frustrated that I can't even have a talk about restructuring Taekwondo practice, where we just have a class that focuses on forms, and we just have a class that focuses on sparring, right? That's one thing we could do to help improve things. The other is to change some of the stuff that we do in sparring practice. So instead of tons of paddle drills, doing more stuff where we use the chest protector and there's more interaction, right? Just like really baseline stuff. It's not super hard to understand. Can we have a conversation about kind of de-emphasizing this, re-emphasizing this, and then just making practices more clear on what we're doing instead of trying to mix it all into one class? Just stuff that's not even necessarily motor learning, stuff that's just like good educational psychology, right? Like good lesson planning, focusing on one or two things instead of everything in one class. We got to hit all the curriculum, right? No, well, the curriculum is all across the map. You have one steps, you have kata, you have sparring, you have all these different things, breaking. Just a basic conversation like that can't really have because the dogma around Taekwondo training culture, or karate training culture, as it has been for the last few decades, is it has it's reprogrammed people's thinking to where they almost aren't able to understand what I'm trying to say. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you disrupt the programming?
Here would be a good, and I should use this more because it's written on my website and whatnot, like of our mission statement. But if you can at least get someone to agree, and I think someone would be hard pushed not to agree, that there are more and less effective training methods within any system.
Yeah.
And then just say, okay, can we talk about the more effective ones? And can we talk about the less effective ones? And can we maybe reallocate some of our valuable time resource towards perhaps the more effective ones? Now, we spoke earlier on about pressure testing, high anxiety and stuff. An actual fight, an actual competition. Highly representative, extremely valuable, probably the richest amount of learning going on. But again, it would be a straw man to say, is that all we want to do? I'm not even suggesting that. So again, it's what's the most effective and reasonably sustainable without causing to the long term health detriment. Like you're saying about the Daisy Fresh guy, I'm actually not much of a jiu-jitsu dork. I don't follow any of the jiu-jitsu players or that. I'd heard of them just recently, but like you're saying, that might be a valid. Here, I'm sitting here with a torn ACL. One of my other coaches, so we go pretty hard too. We've probably got, I think we've probably got a higher level of injury in our gym purely from the fact we're always in that kind of chaos mode. I wouldn't say we go particularly hard, but it's just minute for minute, we do more of it. We do more of the unpredictable stuff.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. Yeah, your probability rise. Yeah. Right.
But again, I think that's been a good starting off point. Can we just agree that some things are more effective than others? And if you say the whole everything has the equivalent value, first of all, that's the conversation's over for me. But if that's what you believe, then okay. As I say, do yourself. But if we can, that's a great starting off point, I feel. To just agree that some things are better than others. And then let's have a conversation around that and start just, even if it's 5 minutes per class, nudging yourself over. And that's the reason I started on the warm-up the other day, because I've heard a lot of the ecological dynamic guys talk about, well, how do we make this radical shift? And they'll say, well, just start with a warm-up. Add a little bit of variability to your warm-up. And then take it from there. And then take it from there. And then get that kind of snowball effect.
Yeah. I think so. One thing that occurred to me is you could just box them in with just assassinate the individual training methods one by one. Demonstrate I think the one that's probably really the strongest one to start with would be focus of attention in the way you cue. And then maybe by extension, when and how often that you cue or give instruction. That's probably really an easy way to start. And the variability thing is also an easy place to start. So how do you start assassinating each of these individual training methods by showing on an individual level, instead of going to the whole theoretic level and then moving down.
Mm-hmm.
Because I understand not everyone thinks that way. Just show just with raw data, dude, 1 steps or lock, if you're jujitsu, lock flows, or if you're like boxing, these intricate pad work, right? I hate that stuff. I was also never good at it, so I'm really happy to learn that it has that it's like not representative, and there's so many problems.
I am delighted. I am delighted how bad all my students are at holding and hitting pads. Yeah. Just terrible.
I could never do the timing bag. I was not good at hitting mitts. And I was really worried, especially when I became an instructor. I just didn't do that stuff. I did a little bit of mitts, but and then I realized later that it's actually not very good. It's not.
It's a parlor trick for me, and it's a parlor trick that we spend way too much time on. And again, the strawmen are back. So what you're going to do is just spar with it. So no, but I'll do maybe a little bit. Even if I did the same amount of sparring, then I'll find another way to use the time that we would have been using the pad work, which will be wrestling, rolling, jiu-jitsu, whatever. Especially in sport.
Yeah. I want to challenge when I teach again, because I do want to teach again. I want to challenge myself to be as experimental as possible. So I like I said before, with like the hook kick, like the spinning hook kick stuff, I'm going to have to make compromises with paddles on things like that, where I don't want people kicking each other in the head. But anything that's trunk, like all that kind of stuff, there's no reason why we can't have it at least a low level of aliveness to introduce, and then just scale it up from there, and just challenge myself to be as absolutely experimental as possible with when I give coaching feedback, instruction, how I instruct, questioning, all that sorts of stuff, just to see, where students are at from 0 to 6 months, 0 to 1 year. And I don't have data from when I was teaching before to form an accurate baseline to put together like a legitimate study. But if they're competitive on a local level with other people's guys, especially if they're competitive with people that are technically higher rank or technically more experienced, I mean, that's enough validation for me. And then maybe we can do a more formal study later on, which I'd like to do. It's just a lot of time and resources.
We bring in a lot of, I want to be careful what I say here, because it's just an observation. Mm-hmm. And it's not always like this, but we have open mats. We have people come in from, I'm talking more about the striking now, kickboxers from other gym. And my policy is, and again, I might change that over time, is that we don't spar hard at all. We don't even wrap our hands. It's the best of a bad bunch of choices as far as I'm concerned. But my team can go against other, I'm choosing my words carefully here, other students or kickboxers or whatever that come from other gyms who look much better, but you can tell the whole time's been spent on action, no perception. And my team just found their own style. I don't advocate. The only style I advocate against is giving one to take one. I think that's one of the dumbest strategies to have. Oh yeah. I don't want any of my team ever being told they have a good chin. And I just see it coming out. They just had the reads. They've just had the reads. They never really train out of context. We'll get, and this was some of the kind of struggle because I was being a bit overzealous. Do we need to drill at all? But I'll still do a tiny little bit of block drilling just to get a quick concept down, and then we'll put it into live play. But it's extremely low amount.
Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with that. My thing is like, just from the frustrations of trying to help people out to understand, at least if you don't want to do it, fine, but at least can you like try and understand where I'm coming from so that you can disagree with what I believe? And whenever you give people permission to do what they used to do, it remetastasizes, right? It's like, yeah, you can use traditional instruction. I don't want people to stop using direct didactic instruction because like I said before, there are contexts where it is necessary. There's people that really just aren't getting it and they need that extra help. They need that remedial help. And there is, once you've done everything you can think of with constraints and questioning, there is nowhere else to go but didactic instruction. That's fine. That is a natural part of knowledge transmission between humans. And there's nothing bad if you have to resort to that. There's nothing super unecological about it. But what is unecological is if that's the status quo.
Right.
Because now you're not approaching training as an adaptation to the actual environmental forces that you're going to experience in competition or self-defense or whatever it is you want to do. Now you're approaching all of training largely as a knowledge transfer process where everything comes from you and it's very behavioral. Everything is like stimulus response. And you give all the scripts, you give the catalog of techniques and responses, and you try to tell them all the nuances, and you try to tell them what they're supposed to be feeling and doing with their body at every given point. And instructors will absolutely do it. I used to do it. You said you used to do it. We will absolutely do that. We will absolutely do that. And you can't absorb that stuff. A lot of that stuff you can't learn until you've experienced it enough. And then some of it, like muscle control, some of that's relative to the persons. The way that they coordinate their muscles, the timing might be slightly different. The angle they pull their knee up for a round kick might be slightly different. Some things just work better for different people, but as long as it's functional, as long as they're scoring points and they're making progress and it's actually working, there's no reason why you should just go in there and just offer a correction because it doesn't look like the formal textbook version of the technique, which I know that traditional martial arts is very bad about. And Brazilian jiu-jitsu is pretty bad about it too. Like everyone knows that you can do an arm bar with your legs crossed, but you can't get away with it in a gym, even if it works for you. Because everyone's going to check you about squeezing your knees together and keeping and unlocking the foot. It's just those things that are just really obnoxious.
Yeah, Ronda Rousey crossed her feet.
Yeah,
and opened her legs.
Right.
So I mean, she found a way to do it. One of the pushbacks I got the other day was that you encourage bad habits when you don't clean up technique in an isolated way, and I'm like, that's completely the wrong way around.
Yeah, you mean like keeping your focus of attention on your body instead of your target, that kind of bad habit?
No, you'll get away with this, but unless you're really technical, you're going to be exposed one day. I said no, it's the constant self-correction of life work.
No, I was being sarcastic because people, they're criticizing you from a place of ignorance because, okay, you do the formal technique. Let's pretend that there are. Just pretend that there are ideal techniques, and there is such a thing as, if you don't do it this exact way with your hands up into the shell tight, that not 9 times, but like at least 6 times out of 10, you're going to be in trouble, right? And the rest of it's going to be a fluke or other whatever. Even given that, you also have your perceptual system. So when you train to people to focus on their body, every time you talk about, you have to move the knee this way. You have to do this. You have to focus on this. You're pulling their focus off the opponent and reading them and focusing on them. And you're you're making them self-conscious about their performance. And every time this is probably one of the most attested things. I think Rob Gray said it was like the most attested thing in like the motor control literature. It's like the corollary to gravity in physics, right? There is no dispute that an external locus of attention produces better performance across every level of strata. Now there's some debate about, elite performers being able to move between external and internal and having a better, like more rounded understanding of what they're doing. But across from beginner, especially for beginner, but across the whole, every skill level, external focus of attention, there's like no evidence that internal attention is better in any dynamic sport context. And the choking literature shows that a lot of the choking seems to happen because they're not focusing on the task and the target. They're focusing on how they're moving their body. Right. And so they're not letting their enskillment, I think is what Stuart said the word is, not letting that procedural ingrained skill that they've built. They're not letting it self-organize would be the ecological word, I think. And instead of focusing on the target and letting everything organize itself according to the skills you've already built, they're focused on the internal timing of when they let the hip hinge and everything, and the knee slides down, and when you extend the bottom of the leg, and keeping the shape of the foot just so that the correct part of the foot hits right here and strikes the ball or strikes the target, hits the hogu. They're worried about all that stuff, and that's how they end up choking. That's one of the major reasons why they end up choking, because of so when you coach people that way, and I'm not saying you can never ever in any context do that, but if that's the status quo, which it is the status quo, it's one of the things I hated most about when coach would look at me when I was rolling, right? He would sometimes just give me just detailed instructions, step by step, how to do the stuff. And sometimes my attention would fall off too much to where I would miss something and he would wiggle out, and then the position would get bad. And the coach would be like, "Oh man." I'm like, "Coach, you did this, coach. This wouldn't have happened if you just let me roll."
So standing on the sidelines, barking copious instructions at your student or athlete, that's not optimal.
No, not usually. I mean, you can. I have another.
Yeah, I was joking there, because it's every fucking grappling.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. They're screaming. That's one thing that Danaher, however you pronounce the name, John Danaher, he's legitimately good at coaching in the sense that he's calm. He's not trying to detail everything that you need to do. When you're at a tournament, the black belts, the brown belts, they're interpreting what they see based on what they would do. Right. And they're trying to tell you every minute thing about how to position your hip, about when to time. But you can't tell somebody when to time something. By time you've said it and they've heard it, if they even process it, the moment's passed. And the chances are their opponents heard it. And their opponent's probably hearing too. If their opponent's in a good place, they might have the space to they might have plenty of head space to process what you're saying if they're winning. it comes from a good place for coaches. They desperately want their athletes to do well. I notice this, and when we go cage side at MMA, I'm guilty of talking a little too much, but really, really try and get. Yeah. I mean, Stuart Armstrong, whether it was him or someone on his podcast, said, game day is my day off. If I've prepared them properly, I don't need to say anything. And we don't quite get there, but that's how I like to view it. You should know by the time getting there. If we've done our job correctly by teasing the right behaviors out of you, you should kind of know what to do when you're in there. Yeah, there's I read a book called The Language of Coaching. He was on Stuart's podcast. I think he was actually on Rob Gray's podcast too. And he's roughly from like a constraints-led approach. So he gives a surprisingly really good kind of intro to motor learning and control at the beginning. I didn't expect it because it's a book on coach cueing. But he gets into cueing, and of course, everything's based around an external locus of tension. There's a few more things he adds that's really great. And if you give somebody the right cue, you can increase performance immediately by a significant margin. And, within the constraints-led framework, coaching is important because you can use it also to help direct and calibrate attention. The same thing with Joan Vickers in her quiet eye research and her research into perception and gaze behavior and decision training and all that kind of stuff. She comes from a constraints-led framework as well. And they've all found that you can create significant, sometimes really, really big gains in performance, lasting gains in performance by using coaching as an opportunity to help them direct attention instead of just telling them what to do. And, in the language coaching book, he recommends establishing cues before giving them in a performance context. So you could still bark, but not in the same way, right? You have a limited number of cues for a few important things that might happen you might need a quick reminder. And so they need to be quick. They need to be external or distal in the way that they're made. And they need to be not abstract. They need to be in concrete language. And they need to be short. They need to be very easily recognizable, very easily processed, because you don't have the attentional focus to spare in the middle of a fight to listen to detailed step-by-step coaching on what you're supposed to do. And so you can do it. There's stuff that you can do, but the trouble is convincing people. So someone says, I'm on board. Now you have to convince them to stop saying it so much, because they're like, yeah, I'm on board. So they changed a little bit about how they coach, but they keep saying it. They repeat. And they do it every time they see something, say something, and try and get this response out of their student. They're just vying for their students' attention. They're pulling the attentional focus off. They have to be more strategic about when they give the cue. And the trouble with that is it really doesn't matter how much research I ever do. I can't tell you when to save those cues for. Mm-hmm. You have to be self-conscious and intentional about coaching and figure out where you need to save those cues for to actually get the results you want to get from barking at them incessantly while they're competing.
Yeah, I'm still a safe distance from getting that right.
Yeah, I think probably most people are.
So I rarely lead, and I try and use the word lead now. I rarely lead gi practice now, but this was interesting. I just want to know your thoughts on this. So it was a month or two ago. I said, we're going to play. One of my favorite chokes is the Bravo choke. Are you familiar with that? You take the kind of lapel over the back and you grab on the inside. Yeah. So I just explained that. I said, here's what we're going to do. I want you to let's all get this grip and just explore this for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to start off our positional sparring with this grip. And then as we progress, it's like, you got to try and, the whole point is to just try and get this grip on your partner. Anyway, towards the end of the class, I was asking for feedback. And one of our purple belts said, that was really amazing. Once I had that grip, because I didn't really show that much after, I said, there's actually a ton of things here once you get it around. There's baseballs, there's X chokes, there's Bravos, there's everything. Yep. And he was like, that was really cool. He said, once I got this grip, I saw all these other things appear. Yeah. And the white belt went, I didn't see anything else, because all I was trying to do was this one thing.
Yep.
And I was like, that's really valuable information, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like one was too focused and the other person was kind of open. And I guess that was more to do with their experience level. But
it's just, I would say that's just an experience issue. The more you do something, the more you can see where you can go from somewhere. You connect more pieces of knowledge. Your attention is so calibrated that you are afforded headspace to think about the different ways you can go. There's also a level of, you have so much, especially training someplace like your gym, you have so much like functional variability, like the good kind of variability you have in a technique to where it's flexible and you can do it a number of different ways. Your guys always train in that environment. So they can, it's not so much that they can see like on a conscious level, they can feel everything that they can do because they've been in that position before. They've done multiple things from that position before. And so now they see the affordances
right.
that one position affords them. And they understand that. I think that's just experience level, honestly. I don't
yeah,
think
when you put it like that, you're
that.
right. When you put it like that, it's right. It's like the more experienced guy, there was more affordances. You just saw more opportunities for action.
Yeah. That's just
pretty simple. Pretty simple when you throw it back at me.
Yeah, it's just I don't know if I even added anything particularly important. I'm just reframing it from an ecological understanding because you had already said, maybe it's just an experience thing. It's absolutely an experience thing. That's exactly what it is. And he's just been in more positions more times to where he can feel it. He can feel it, right? And that feeling he's able to translate, he's able to articulate into words, which is also a really good thing too. But yeah, it's just an experience. I don't think there's anything that you can do other than what you're already doing: variable practice, representative practice, occasionally tossing in other options for them to play around with. Other than that, get your rounds, man.
Yeah, get your rounds. Get your rounds with different people. It's a new
get your rounds with different people too.
Find a new solution.
Absolutely, yeah. That's all you can do. There's no quick fix to that. I think a lot of like with information processing, it allows for a lot of BS because and I'm sure you see on Facebook too. There's always some new thing about how to get your black belt faster, how I got to blue belt in 1 month with no wrestling training, all this, that's an exaggeration, but there's all these like, right. Here's all these things that you can do. And all of it is like some garbage about learning styles, or do a jiu-jitsu journal, which is not bad, but do a jiu-jitsu journal or something that's like very structured. It's like way more isolated. It's like, yeah, I did a Master of Education and I tried to inappropriately apply these principles of academic learning to motor learning. And this is what's going to get you to your black belt faster. So you need to do all these special drills and lock flows I put together, and that's going to get you there faster. So there's all this BS that people are marketing from an information processing approach. And I feel like when you go with that approach, there's always that hack. There's always that thing that you can do extra, that you can control more, that's going to help you with this one position. And the thing I like, or this one situation you're in, the thing I like about the ecological approach is when you understand it, how it interacts with the human learning system, you're supposed to make mistakes. You have to make mistakes. There is no special sauce. You just have to get more experience under those conditions. Mm-hmm. And the only thing special is your ability to play with constraints so that you can build innovative and novel mini games almost, where people have a better ability to explore. The feedback loops are tight, but they're representative, and the information is much more rich. That's where the secret sauce is, but there's no special technique. Right. There's no special pad work. There's no special combination. There's no special cue, right?
And it's actually a lot more. It's actually really quite simple when you do reduce it. I took my youngest son and daughter to the pool yesterday. We've been spending every other day at the pool all summer. My daughter couldn't swim before, and her mum came with her yesterday, and she jumped off the top diving board and then swam away at the side. And her mum was like, "When did you learn to swim?" I said, "This summer, I guess." Yeah, we're just exposed to the pool every day, and we played around and doggy paddling for 1 foot became 2 foot, became 3 foot, became 4 foot, and before you know it, and then jumping off the side to the small, and then before you know it, no teaching.
Yeah,
we learned entirely through play this summer.
I did swimming. The funny thing is I had already kind of knew how to swim before I did swimming lessons. So they skipped me to like level 3, whatever. And it's hilarious. Think about when you structure most people don't take swimming lessons. And I did both. Like I kind of learned to swim before, but I still took swimming lessons. So I saw both sides of it. Swimming formal swimming lessons is fascinating because there's an obvious dissonance between the actual skill building that's happening. And so that's the one level. Like, is this actually helping you swim better right now? And then managing fear. Mm-hmm. So swimming lessons work in a highly traditional, highly modular, isolated fashion. You start with your kicking on the side. You put your hand on the thing and you kick, right? Then you work up the courage to hold your breath and go underwater and come back up. Then you move to like survival things, like how to do a dead man float on your back, right? And then none of this has to do with actually swimming around. And you don't connect all that stuff. You learn the parts of the brush stroke and the frog stroke and the front stroke. You learn all of it separately. And then you get to level 4 and you finally put it together. And then it starts to be a game of endurance. So how far down can you dive? How long can you hold your breath? Then it's like a long train of just tiny incremental steps. But everybody knows that you could learn how to do every single one of those things in 1 or 2 afternoons if you just jumped in the pool with your dad. Everyone knows it. My grandparents said it. That's how they learned how to swim. That's partially how I learned how to swim, which is why they skipped me 2 or 3 levels. My dad taught me some strokes. He taught me more all at once. He just taught me how to do the whole stroke in the shallow end. And then finally he's like, all right, I'm going to throw you in the deep end, swim to the shallow end. I'm here to get you if you, whatever, but try your hardest. And that's what he did. He threw me in the deep end and I had to swim back. I had to swim to there. And most of people basically kind of know how to swim already. People only drown of not knowing how to swim because they've convinced themselves they don't know how to swim. There's really nothing to it, right? People halfway already have all the coordination when you show them. Swimming is so intuitive that it's really a tragedy that anyone drowns from not knowing how to swim, because it's really
definitely in a swimming pool, especially in a swimming pool.
Yeah,
and my daughter said something pricked my ears. She went, when she jumped off the diving board, she says, I swim better when in the deeper water. I said, yeah, I know, because there's no floor there.
You have more room. You can create more propulsion. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and when she was in where she can just touch the bottom, that was like a little crutch.
It was a crutch, absolutely. Yeah.
So she was just touching the floor to bob herself. But I said, you've no choice there. When there's 12 feet underneath you, you're swimming.
Yep. Yeah, I think it would be better if they just taught kids, okay, teach them how to hold their breath fine. Teach them the whole stroke. Put your hand underneath them as they swim and then just pull it away. Don't do kicking at the, holding on to the side and kicking and bounce. They'll do something where you let go and you'll go down underwater and it's shallow. So you just kick yourself back up and you grab it. Forget all that stuff. It's just teach them the whole stroke and then help them to gain the confidence to swim across whatever, and move them in larger leaps. There's no reason why everything has to be so just painfully incremental. And I think another thing would be, once the kids kind of know how to swim, would they actually fear going up on a little higher board to jump off? I mean, maybe the tall one, sure. Yeah, that's very daunting. But like you have like a one that's 4 feet off the ground and have one that's like 8 feet, right? Not a super huge difference. If we stop telling kids that it's such a big difference, right. Oh, you can't do that till level 5.
Right.
If we stop telling them that, like, would they just be fine? Probably. They probably would be fine. Because kids used to they learn how to swim in the freaking creek and then jump off the tree branch. Tree branch is 10 feet off of the water or higher. So, most of those kids are fine.
And swimming, to be honest, probably is easier than riding a bike. But again, there's that psychological thing, and parents have it too, right? I mean, the kid falls off the bike, they'll scrape their knee and bump their elbow, but they're not drowning. So I think parents play into that fear too, just like you're saying.
Oh yeah, parents with going back to the teachers' expectancies. I think that's a phenomenon that just kind of applies everywhere, and the way that what you expect out of it's like with a dog. Dogs are more in tune to that stuff, and if you're like a really anxious, neurotic person, your dog is going to be miserable. It's going to have poor behavior. It's going to be erratic. And because the dog is looking at you, your energy that you emit through body language and tone of voice and stuff like that, nonverbals, it's looking to you for guidance on how it ought to feel. And if you are that way, your dog is going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible dog, high anxiety, won't calm down, very defensive, separation anxiety, all that kind of stuff. The same thing with kids. I have friends that had parents that were, people used to say like, oh, your mom's really strict. And, my parents were more strict. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. The issue is when your parents are neurotic. When you have neurotic parents, it's not strictness that's the problem. It's neuroticism. When you have parents that they're helicopters and every little thing is a big deal and they're worried about everything. And you're like, parents have a nasty habit of this. Moms really have a nasty habit of this, of they ask you all these probing questions because they're insecure about something you're doing. And they want you kind of to, whatever your answer is, they want that reassurance. But in the asking of those probing questions, they make you insecure about it. And so there's this vicious cycle of neuroticism that kind of finds its way down. And so some of my friends that have come up, they're just, holy smokes, they're weird people. And just because their parents were that way. And their parents were neurotic and erratic and eccentric and just, they made mountains out of molehills and de-emphasized things bizarrely. And it's just, you could tell sometimes talking to people, it's like, yeah, your parents were weird. The way that you're interacting with me is so strange and socially different that I can tell your parents were weird. But all that is to say that all of that stuff, your neuroticism, the way that you frame things to your children, that can raise or lower the level of anxiety that your child has. And that affects their ability to get good confidently at that skill at a slower or a faster rate, in my opinion.
Now we're dipping into the old growth versus fixed mindset and stuff. And yeah, the whole other podcast of fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Speaking of children, I better go and feed mine because I'm not neurotic enough to make their dinner at 6 o'clock. It's almost 9. So I better go and get them. That's 3 hours in, Josh. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too, dude. Yeah, you need to feed your kids.
Let's just finish up here quickly. How I came across you. I forget. I'm always scouring for some of the hitters in the space. No. I correct myself. Someone passed it on to me. Your podcast said this guy's speaking a lot of the same stuff you're speaking about, and it was like finding out I had a long lost brother out there. So it was good to have our first in face meeting here and talking shop.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm enjoying it. I don't have a lot of people who know any of the terminology who I can speak to. So this is a lot of fun.
Well, I hope I'm able to keep up with you because I can tell you're maybe a little bit more deeper in the weeds than I am, but I'm on your tail.
Yeah, well, I'm because I don't teach a lot. I have more time to put my head into the theory.
But it's fun for me because we'll be able to, show each other's sides up there, because I'm on the mats every day and I'm really playing around with this stuff. And I do feel like from week to week, I'm changing as a coach, and and that reminds me too that don't get too sure of what I'm doing today, because by next month I'm going to be doing something different. But hopefully we're meandering towards some kind of bullseye.
Absolutely.
Even if we never get there. So.
Yeah. I don't know if there is. It's an adaptive process, and adaptation is in part individual. So it might always be changing because people are, everyone's the individual.
Well, and I kind of hope so, because that'll keep me on my toes too. So
keeps it more interesting for sure.
Right. So let's keep in touch. I am going to sign off here. I will send you the audio and probably video too. I'll upload and give you a link. You feel free to do what you want with it. I'll probably cut it up, maybe put an intro on it if you don't mind. I won't do anything without your permission, and maybe you can do whatever you want. You can drop on yours. I can drop on mine. Whatever. Yeah.
What I'll do is definitely I'll put an intro on it, and then I probably won't really edit it that much. Well, my brother does the editing, because I like to keep most of the conversation like really, really natural. But I'll just tell everyone to go check out the Primal MMA podcast.
I'll do that too. When I say edit, I don't edit out the content so much. It's a lot, maybe some of my and my and my brain farts.
Yeah, my brother does some of that stuff too. Yeah.
Heavily edited to make me sound fluent and concise.
Yeah, I'll give him stats. I give the stats special treatment to people who agree with me, but not to people who don't.
Right. I'll make them sound like.
I'll make everyone else look dumb. Yeah.
But I've been fortunate enough. Everyone I've spoken to and had as guests have been orders of magnitude smarter than me. And what's really nice about this community is that when you reach out and pester someone enough, they're generally really receptive. So.
Oh yeah.
I don't think the network only grows. We're not going to run out of guests anytime soon.
Yeah, I can't get Hicks and Gracie on my podcast, but I can get Rob Gray.
and of course, do we want? I think about that too. I've got some.
Well, I'm not really super interested in having Hicks and Gracie on my podcast. Honestly,
yeah,
that's not what I'm doing. That's not my pod. Everyone else does that. That's not what I do. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
All right, brother. All right, it was great having a good long chat with you. I appreciate all the nuggets, and I got a lot from this, and I'll send you over the link.
All right, dude. I'll talk to you later.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.